Um, I often live in a place of terror, believing the world is unsafe. I would prefer to see it from the eyes of love. Can you speak of fear and sitting in love rather than fear? And this is such an important question. In some way, in the Buddhist teaching, one of the phrases for the sense of separateness, the illusion that we're separate from the world, the small sense of self, is called the body of fear. The more separate we feel in some way, the more also we fear the world, because we feel that we're somehow apart from it.
Yeah.
And so to deal with fear is a really deep and persistent. In some way, love and fear are the same coin, um, on opposite sides. Love, if you will, is that which expands beyond fear in some fashion. So your question is, how can you sit in love and live in love rather than in fear? The first step, I'm sorry to say, is to love your fear. There's a way in which you have to actually bow to the fear and say, I know you. You too are a part of this humanity where, from the single-celled organisms that Wes would have talked about last week, with their little cilias and so forth, and something comes near and it's good to eat, and it's sort of, this little cell opens toward it, and something comes in, it seems like a predator, and the chemicals don't seem right, and you shrink back.
Yeah, it's biologically encoded.
So it's built in.
Yeah.
And if you think, well, I shouldn't be afraid or I shouldn't have fear, already that is a kind of layer of judgment and lack of love. And we all think that. We all judge ourselves. But if you can step back and say, oh, this, physical body hasn't wired into it, there's going to be fear. The mind has stories of the future. Fear is always about the future. It's not about what's here. It's always these stories. And the mind secretes thoughts the way the salivary gland secretes saliva. And they go and they tell, Mark Twain's statement where he said, my life was filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened, right? And it can catastrophize.
Yes.
And it can make, and so forth. And it's hard. It's hard to be frightened and it's hard to be anxious. So then what you want to do is look for those resources. After you stop judging, you bow and say, I know you fear. Okay, show me your worst. Give me the dance. Oh, there it is. Death and destruction, humiliation. It has, it only has a few channels, but it'll do its thing. Okay, now how do I find this other place of love? First, by loving the fear itself. All right, this is like the demon in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, you actually feed and, you offer the demon love rather than try and fight against it, because the fighting against fear makes it worse. And then...
And makes it stronger.
Makes it stronger, yeah, it gives it life. And then you find the place of refuge, or it is the place that feeds you in some way, your resource. And even now, imagine, remember, think of the most beautiful, holding, loving experience, place that you've ever been in your life, the temple, the beach, the circumstance. And even as you visualize it, you can start to feel it in your body, in your being. And you can feel in your body, what place in your body feels the strongest, the most settled, the calmest, the easiest. And you let the image of this beautiful place that you have had, because you have had that, or the love that you've had in some really special circumstance, let that remind the circuits of your nervous system and the vibration, energy of your heart, oh yeah, there's another channel, there's another way to be. And bring that in. There's a way in which you want to find this image or find this place and feed yourself with that love, so that fear is there. Yes, thank you. You put it on an altar. Say, there's the fear altar. It can stay there. It doesn't have to go away. And here, let me bring in this other energy. What do you do, Catherine, when you're anxious or afraid?
Again, I don't have any story whatsoever that says that fear shouldn't be there, or even terror. If terror arises in my being, I often say that you don't have to quiet the mind. You simply notice the quiet that contains the mind.
Mm.
So if fear comes, however big it is, however big the storm of fear might be, or the terror or whatever it happens to be, the rage, whatever, I always have a sense that it's happening in very ground space. So I let it be there because I know it's passing and it's working itself out. I don't try to feed it. I don't want to feed it, but I let it be. Something triggered it, right? And in a way, that is, from my point of view, a loving response to my own self. It's saying, you're conditioned in a certain way. Certain things will arise based on these conditioned circumstances. And you don't have to be in battle with your own conditioning. You see, a lot of people are trying to work on their conditioning, and that is fairly hopeless. But you can start to give much more attention to that which you might call unconditioned, the unconditioned clear awareness, the purest, most essential sense of being, the love droplet, right, that you are, even though this conditioning might roar along. Some people have much more powerful conditioning than others. Some people have had lots of trauma. If you've had a lot of trauma, and you perhaps were also abused as a child or whatever the circumstance, now we know through lots of bio reading by scientists that you will have a stress response very, very quickly. You'll have a much faster and more pronounced and more prolonged stress response. And it just seems so unfair that not only did you have to suffer the abuse, but now you have a lifelong, quick hair trigger stress response as a result. But if you know that and you just accept it, right, you just say, okay, that is what is so. I join the many millions and trillions, if we're speaking in terms of all of the people of all of the time, who have had that same situation here as life. I join all of them as my comrades in that kind of suffering, in that particular flavor of suffering. And arm in arm, we walk on here and celebrate life and know that that does not need to define you. It is not the totality of what you are. You can address this, move your attention to a deeper aspect of you that was never abused, that was not in terror, that was never stained in any way. So in this way, you coexist happily with fear when it arises. Okay, there's fear. All right. You might even go through a phase. It might be a phase of a few months there that you might have anxiety. Okay, living with anxiety, or anxiety arising periodically. It's not there constantly. It's there perhaps more frequently than you would like. And then you begin to just entrain yourself to know, okay, it's not the totality. I'll just move my attention into that which isn't so anxious, even though anxiety is whispering along, streaming, bubbling along, and so on. These are all ways of actually loving yourself and saying to yourself, you don't have to really change all this conditioning and eliminate fear and terror. That would be a big war you would create inside yourself.
Yeah, what you're saying is really moving to me, because you're speaking to that inviolable spirit in a being, in a person, that no matter what has happened, there is some place that is pure and that cannot be touched.
That's right.
And remembering that, then you start to remember, who am I really? Am I the trauma? Am I the history? Or am I the one who knows?